In the 19th century, America was a nation completely on the move. It was gripped by an idea so powerful it would literally redraw the map of the continent. But this isn't just a story of expansion. Nope. It's the story of two totally different visions for the exact same piece of land, and the epic, often tragic, clash that came next. Okay, let's get into this. So, at the very heart of all this was one single concept: manifest destiny. And you gotta understand, this wasn't just some government policy, it was a belief, almost like a religion. The idea was that the United States had a divine right, a mission from God, to stretch from the Atlantic all the way to the Pacific. This one idea was the engine driving everything and everyone westward. And here it is, a simple question, but one with earth-shattering consequences. Because for the hundreds of thousands of settlers pushing west, they thought they were entering an empty frontier. But for the hundreds of thousands of people already living there, they were being invaded. This single question right here, it sets up the entire conflict of this story. Okay, so how does an idea like manifest destiny actually become reality, right? It takes a lot more than just belief. It takes real action, it takes government policies, and some pretty incredible feats of engineering to turn an ideology into, well, facts on the ground. This right here, this was pure fuel for the fire. The Homestead Act was just an incredible deal. Imagine being told you could have 160 acres of land, that's a huge piece of land, for practically nothing. All you had to do was promise to live on it and farm it. For millions of people in the crowded cities back east, and for immigrants coming over from Europe, this was a chance at a whole new beginning. It was an offer they just couldn't refuse. And look, if the Homestead Act was the incentive, the Transcontinental Railroad was the superhighway that got you there. All of a sudden, a dangerous, months-long journey by wagon train was cut down to about a week in relative safety and comfort. It was a technological marvel that literally stitched the country together with iron, moving people, goods, and even the army at a speed no one had ever imagined. The West was officially open for business, and that came with consequences that were both miraculous and absolutely devastating. So, who were these people, the ones who actually answered the call to go west? Well, they were anything but a single group. They came from all walks of life, from totally different parts of the country and the world, and every single one of them was chasing a different dream and facing their own brutal set of challenges. Now, this is really interesting because it shows you just how different the experience could be. On one hand, you had the sodbusters. These were mostly white farmers from the East and immigrants from Europe who had to literally bust through the thick, tough prairie sod. And let me tell you, this was a task so hard it would break plows, and it would break people's spirits. But then you had the exodusters. These were thousands of African Americans who were fleeing the pure terror and oppression of the South after the Civil War. For them, going west wasn't just about land. It was a biblical exodus. It was a search for real freedom and safety that they hoped to find out on the plains. But hey, not everyone came out west to farm. For a lot of people, the West didn't promise slow, hard work. It promised instant, unimaginable wealth. Discoveries like the Comstock Lode in Nevada set off these massive silver and gold rushes. They created these chaotic, totally lawless boom towns that just exploded out of the desert overnight, filled with miners, gamblers, and hustlers, all hoping to strike it rich and get out before the whole thing went bust. And if you want a picture of just how insane the frenzy was, this is it. The Oklahoma Land Rush was a literal race. At the sound of a pistol shot, 50,000 people on horses and in wagons just surged forward to stake a claim on land that, by the way, had been Native American territory just moments before. It was just this chaotic, dramatic symbol of the relentless and often ruthless pace of settlement. Okay, so now we have to pivot. We have to turn the camera around, because this wave of settlement was crashing directly into a world that had existed on that same land for centuries. For the Lakota, the Cheyenne, and the other Plains nations, this wasn't an empty land being settled. It was their homeland being overrun. To really understand the Plains nations, you first have to understand the Tatanka. That's Ta-Tan-Ka, the American buffalo. This animal was everything. It was a walking supermarket, a clothing store, a hardware store, and a spiritual center, all rolled into one. And this is where that railroad we talked about comes back into the story, but with a much darker purpose. It didn't just bring settlers. It brought commercial hunters who, with the encouragement of the U.S. Army, slaughtered the buffalo by the millions.
This wasn't just for sport or for hides. It was a deliberate strategy to destroy the very foundation of native life and force survivors onto reservations.
And out of this crisis, leaders like Tatanka Iyotake, that's Tatakan Iyotake, the Hunkpapa Lakota holy man the world came to know as Sitting Bull, they rose up. He led his people's resistance, and this quote right here, it just perfectly captures the heart of his fight. A refusal to be remade in someone else's image, a powerful defense of his people's identity and their right to even exist. Just look at this timeline. It shows you how quickly everything just fell apart. In 1868, the U.S. government signs a treaty guaranteeing the sacred Black Hills to the Lakota people forever. But then, gold is discovered there. By 1876, the Lakota and their allies win a huge, stunning victory at the Battle of Little Bighorn. But just 14 years later, by 1890, the fight ends in the horrific massacre at Wounded Knee, a promise made and broken in just over 20 years. So, with most of the military resistance crushed, the U.S. government shifted its tactics. The goal was no longer just to control the Plains nations, but to fundamentally erase their way of life and force them to assimilate into American culture. Okay, this slide is absolutely crucial. Just look at the stark contrast here. The Homestead Act uses the idea of individual land ownership to build a new society for settlers. Then, just 25 years later, the Dawes Act uses that very same concept, individual land ownership, to dismantle an existing society by breaking up communally held tribal lands and selling off whatever was left over to white settlers. It's the same tool, used for opposite and devastating results. And this wasn't some random process. It was a deliberate 3-step playbook. Step 1, force people onto reservations. Step 2, use laws like the Dawes Act to break up their economic and social systems. And Step 3, take their children, send them to mandatory boarding schools far from home, and forbid them from speaking their language or practicing their religion, all in an attempt to erase their identity. Now, in the face of all this cultural destruction, a new spiritual movement began to spread, the Ghost Dance. It was a message of hope, a prophecy that the buffalo would return, that their ancestors would come back, and that the white expansion would just peacefully recede. It was a beautiful, desperate prayer for restoration. But the U.S. authorities, they didn't see a peaceful movement. They saw a threat. They thought it was a prelude to a massive uprising. So on December 29, 1890, the 7th Cavalry surrounded a band of ghost dancers near Wounded Knee Creek. An attempt to disarm them escalated, and the soldiers opened fire with rifles and cannons, killing nearly 300 Lakota people, many of them women and children. Wounded Knee marked the brutal, tragic end of the Plains Wars. Now, it's really tempting to see all of this as just distant history, right? A closed chapter in a book. But the thing is, the conflicts and the questions that defined the 19th century American West are still very much alive today. Its legacy is all around us. Let's fast forward 126 years from Wounded Knee. At Standing Rock, North Dakota, thousands of people, including members from over 200 different Native nations, gathered to protest an oil pipeline. The protest was focused on the pipeline's threat to their only water supply, and the fact that it cut through lands that held deep, sacred, and cultural meaning. Look at these themes. Conflict over treaty rights. Sound familiar? That's the Fort Laramie Treaty all over again. Debates on land and resource control. That's the same issue at the heart of the Dawes Act. The struggle for tribal sovereignty, the protection of sacred sites. See? These are not new issues. They are the same fundamental battles from the 19th century, just being fought again here in the 21st. And that leaves us with this final, really crucial question. The horses might have been replaced by bulldozers and the cavalry by corporations and courtrooms, but the core conflict over land, resources, and culture remains. The story of the American West, well, it isn't really over. It's a continuous narrative, and its next chapter is still being written today.